Hello, I aim to present to you today a framework for future fabrics. We are all burnt by ultraviolet rays. We all contain water in the same ratio as the Earth does, and salt water in the same ratio as the oceans do. We are poems about the hyperobject Earth. So why does Timothy Morton want to remind us of our fundamental interconnectedness with the planet? The fact that we are so essentially linked to Earth because we're made from the same elements, and we have a deeper understanding. And sustainability is just exactly this, looking at Earth's living systems and how we humans interact with them. We are the dominant species on Earth, using natural capital, the Earth's resources, at a rate of 1.7 times beyond Earth's capacity. So why can't we learn to consume within the Earth's planetary boundaries and put policies in place that learn to contain the excess? Its economy. We have destroyed our natural capital for the sake of capitalism, taking living, live, raw materials to make products to generate wealth. We have pushed consumerism, endangering intergenerational well-being, and we extract 60 billion tonnes of natural resources a year. Land, water, forests used to make tech, transport, industrialised goods such as those used in the fashion industry. Our economy of extraction and overconsumption of Earth's resources has led to increased levels of carbon in the atmosphere, such as we have not experienced in 3 million years. The carbon cycle that we have created since the Industrial Revolution comes from extracting deep-sea fossil carbon to combust it, to drive energy, to fuel the modern industrialisation. Luckily, the oceans absorb 90% of the heat and carbon created, and this breaks down into acid, causing, in turn, the collapse of entire marine ecosystems. The devastation after decades of excessive emissions is mind-blowing. Sea levels are rising. The Pacific Ocean now has 6 times more plastic in it than plankton. And one tragic example is linked to textiles, that of the Aral Sea between Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, losing 70% of its volume due to diverting water for cotton irrigation. And this is the direct cost of cheap cotton. Every time you overshop, there's a result, and in this case, desertification. Biodiversity is currently threatened. We face a mass extinction of 1 million species, which if we don't do something to address this over the next decade, we will tip the balance of life on Earth, a balance already threatened by extreme social inequality. At the moment, 82% of wealth belongs to only 1% of the population, leaving half of the planet in extreme poverty, and a third of these are children who are in totally insecure situations, vulnerable, and they are our vulnerable future. And the fashion industry in particular is responsible for this, being highly dependent not only on natural capital but human capital, cheap labour. And this is because our goods are underpriced and dependent upon modern slavery, which is what is hidden behind offshore sourcing. We employ 75 million people across the globe, and our industry uses 7 trillion litres of water, 1.2 billion kilowatt hours of electricity, and 140 million tonnes of coal, making us an industry totally dependent on fossil fuels. Out of the 100 million tonnes of fibre we produce, 63% is polyester. Polyester, a pet product made from coal, petroleum and water, using 330 million barrels of oil. It's not only what we extract, it's also what we emit. 14.2 kilos of CO2 per kilo of polyester and 17 litres of water per kilo. Furthermore, polyester very sadly is a conflict material. A quarter of interstate conflicts since the 70s have been linked to oil. However, polyethylene terephthalate has one redeeming feature. It is the most recycled of thermoplastics, and it is also recyclable. That's if you save it from landfill, because unfortunately only 1% of textiles today are recycled, making it really important to implement more recycling facilities close to local environments. And this enforces the need to work with local authorities. How do we all work together to try and change the textile production paradigm? And can we do it? Well, after a decade of fighting for change, people like Fashion Revolution can see an industry finally making transitions. Government today is pushing for more legislation and incentives to build a more local, regenerative textile industry. For my part, the shift came 10 years ago when I decided to quit luxury buying to become an advocate for sustainability. This was after a first encounter in Kutch through Shrujan, where I witnessed textile craft, in this case embroidery, being used as an efficient tool for social development and female empowerment. Fashion, for once, could be useful, not just frivolous, and my choice of career in textiles not futile. Fashion toys with the notion of beauty, but a garment can only be beautiful if it is made well, without the sweat of poverty. Poverty and social inequality really play on your mind if you work in luxury, and in my case, I realised that I could forge new paths when I had the opportunity of starting to work for the UN. There I could use textile knowledge to accelerate social change, and I left Stella McCartney to work on poverty reduction, swapping the Parisian catwalk for the slums of Corrigocho, and I've never turned back. Today I'm an educator and corporate advisor in sustainability, and 10 years on, we can see that sustainability in fashion in particular has become synonym of formulaic methods to change consumption and production patterns. We practice zero-waste pattern cutting, circularity, upcycling, dead stock sourcing. My students use existing clothing to make Dadaist objets trouvés. Traceability puts logistics in place to track supply chains back to their origins, and one question remains: how can we better connect with nature when most designers live in an urban environment? Well, they start with looking at their fabrics, the materials, materiality. Sustainability has forced fashion designers to look more closely at textiles and know more about the cloth of their trade. I know this because I've held the role of head of fabrics for many years and had the responsibility of identifying the mills and the suppliers who will make the customised prints and wovens and planes that bulk up the collection and hold the key to environmental and ethical change. Your ideas as a sourcer have to stretch beyond trend, beyond merchandising, beyond visualising patterns and colours for the next season, to knowing how to filter your materials for chemicals that are hazardous to both human and environmental health. You will start by making a transition plan, a preferred fibre plan, where you chart all your materials and you see how you could change from conventional production moves towards a regenerative and restorative form of textile manufacturing. If you take the plan I suggest here, loss of biodiversity. If you source cotton, you're responsible for sourcing pesticides that kill pollinators. You don't want to do that. Go organic and support biodiversity instead. Plastic pollution. Work with Parley for the Oceans. They collect ocean plastic and then recycle it into yarn. Deforestation. Why use viscose? Instead, buy organic silk. Viscose cuts down trees, whereas organic silk plants mulberries that work on agroforestry projects that support soil erosion. Go through this and many personal priorities will emerge for each business. What you have to do is focus on your own personal practice. And in my case, this is colour. Colour is the starting point of any new collection that I work on and any new energy. A new colour scheme is a new narrative. Behind that narrative, one can read the imprint of colour on the environment. Over 10,000 dyes and pigments are used globally annually, and wastewater from textile plants are considered the most polluting of all effluents. Dyes may be defined as substances that provide colour by altering the crystal structure of any coloured substance. 7 million tonnes of dyes are produced annually, and they release chlorinated compounds and traces of heavy metals into both soil and waters. They reduce photosynthetic activity when disgorged into rivers, causing oxygen deficiency and killing life. Dyestuffs, furthermore, can be mutagenic and sometimes carcinogenic. So why do we carry on with this when, for millennia, botanical dyes from many sources coloured fabrics successfully, working with nature? Indigo, logwood, madder, woad. From the Romans to the East India Company, they coloured textiles, made fortunes and made history, laying the pathway for globalised trade. Through cloth, we can trace the movements of humanity. We can date our history, our culture, from Venice to the caves of Don Juan. Woven motifs dyed with traditional plants have orned migrant humans. Georg Simmel theorized, fashion and the exotic have closely been linked. The fashion phenomenon was only to be found in civilizations where the foreignness of the objects added to their attraction rather than detracted. Plant-based colour seduced the world right through to the Industrial Revolution, when William Henry Perkins discovered synthetic moving in 1856. Then alizarin crimson followed and was extracted from coal tar, alongside a whole palette of 30 colours put forth by Hummel in 1890. They were faster and cheaper than their natural dye alternatives, and soon chemical dyes won over the market until today, when most dyes are petrochemical still, revealing our dependency on fossil fuels. I'd like to illustrate this through the symbolic blue of indigo. 98% of indigo is synthetic, and despite renewed interest in cultivating indigo plants, Indigofera tinctoria is rarely used to dye your pair of jeans. Today, you will instead be using benzene from petrol, formaldehyde, which is corrosive, and sodium cyanide, a rapidly acting poison. So why are we allowed to use such a cocktail of toxic, harmful fossil fuel-based chemicals for just one colour? And 142 million pounds of indigo are used per year? This shouldn't be acceptable, just because it's common practice. Legislation should instead inform consumers about what they're putting on their skin. And toxicity isn't the only issue. Greenhouse gas emissions total 1.2 billion tonnes annually, so we need to mitigate this impact. Botanical dyes are our chance to capture carbon. Appropriate organic farming of dye plants can capture carbon and fix it into the soil. And plant-based dyes are not only biodegradable, but they'll compost up and they can be refed into the soil, guaranteeing circular and regenerative culture. We know that plant-based indigo enhances soil, and a new wave of growers are expanding today from the south of France to California, flourishing and exploring restorative ways of dyeing and growing. Carbon farming of dye plants can counter unintentional anthropogenic dispersion of CO2 into the atmosphere with the drawdown of intentional anthropogenic harnessing of carbon into the soil. The IPCC says really clearly, enhancing soil carbon is the only viable option to achieve negative emissions, and we can do that. Yet, agriculture isn't the only solution. We have to look at urban solutions as well. We can seek haiku living colour, deriving pigment from food waste, using avocados, berries, coffee as a source, making use of all the waste chains available, just like other textile designers who are making patterns from discarded temple waste, sacred offerings, to the leftovers from wedding displays. And all of this is showing a positive resurgence of natural dyes. So I'm creating a dyers circle encompassing textile historians, mills, fashion houses, chemists, designers with academic institutions, all coming together to create a collective repository of knowledge. And this online platform will be hosted by Common Objective and aims to influence a change in our industry whilst making fabulous colour. It's open to all colour enthusiasts, and the colour recipes uploaded will enrich a palette that's referenced using comparative spectrometrics that will compare all the dye stuffs from different origins. This experiment is furthermore launched with the participation of historian Dominique Cardon, and I couldn't have wished for a better person to help me fuel a magnitude of change. Together, through colour enthusiasm, the Dyers Circle will share eco-awareness not only with industry but with you, the general public, and bring colour closer to nature through textiles elegantly enjoyed. Thank you very much.